Every person you have ever met, every person you have ever heard of, and every person who has ever lived in the last 10,000 years shares a secret written in our blood. Look around at our world today. 8 billion people. A global civilization spanning every continent, from the highest mountains to the deepest valleys. It feels like we have always been the masters of this planet, an unstoppable force of nature. But what if I told you that, nearly a million years ago, every single one of us almost vanished? Imagine the entire human race reduced to the size of a small village. If those few individuals had failed, the history of the world would be silent. No pyramids, no moon landings, no art, no music. Just an empty earth. This is not science fiction. This is the story of our greatest escape in the moment humanity almost died. For decades, scientists have looked at the human genome and noticed something strange. Compared to other primates like chimpanzees or gorillas, humans have remarkably low genetic diversity. It is as if we all come from the same very small family tree. But it wasn't until recently that we realized just how small that tree actually was. In 2023, a groundbreaking study published in the journal Science revealed a terrifying reality hidden in our DNA. Using a sophisticated new tool called FitCoal, researchers from China, Italy, and the United States looked back through hundreds of thousands of years of genetic history. They weren't just looking at fossils. They were looking at the living data inside you. What they found was a massive gap in our history. About 900,000 years ago, our ancestors did not just struggle. They were pushed to the absolute edge of extinction. The population did not just dip. It plummeted by a staggering 98.7%. Think about that number for a second. If you had 1,000 people, only 13 would be left. In this global catastrophe, the total number of breeding individuals dropped to just 1,280. 1,280 people to populate an entire planet. That is fewer people than you would find in a typical high school or a single city block. This was the human genetic bottleneck, and here is where it gets truly haunting. This was not a temporary dip. This was not a single bad year or a decade of hardship. This bottleneck lasted for over 100,000 years. For more than 1,000 generations, humanity hung by a thread so thin it is a miracle it did not snap. From roughly 930,000 years ago to 813,000 years ago, our ancestors were an endangered species. They were more vulnerable than the giant panda is today. But how do we know this? How can we possibly see a population crash from nearly a million years ago without a time machine? The answer lies in the way genes are passed down. Every time a population shrinks, it loses genetic variance. It is like a deck of cards being shuffled and dealt, but someone keeps taking cards away. By looking at the variation in modern human genomes, the FitCoal method allows scientists to calculate exactly how many ancestors were needed to produce the genetic patterns we see today. The math points to a single narrow gate that every human ancestor had to pass through. If you were standing in Africa 900,000 years ago, you would have seen a world in chaos. This era is known as the mid-Pleistocene transition. It was a time of violent planetary change. The Earth's climate cycles were shifting. Before this, ice ages happened every 41,000 years. But suddenly the cycles slowed down and became much more intense, stretching to 100,000 years. The ice ages became longer, colder, and much more brutal. As the northern hemisphere froze, the impact was felt globally. In Africa, the birthplace of our species, the lush forests and rolling grasslands began to wither. The rain stopped coming. Massive droughts turned once vibrant ecosystems into harsh, punishing deserts. Food sources that our ancestors had relied on for millions of years simply disappeared. Imagine the desperation. You are part of a small band of hominids. Every day is a battle against the elements. You see your numbers dwindling, the water holes are drying up, the animals you hunt are migrating away or dying off. The world is becoming a graveyard. This environmental pressure was the physical wall of the bottleneck. It was a filter that only the most resilient, the most intelligent, and the most cooperative could pass through. But here's the mystery that baffles scientists. How did those 1,280 people survive for 100,000 years in such a hostile world? They should have been wiped out by a single disease, a single bad drought, or even just bad luck. Yet they endured. They didn't just survive, they changed. It is during this period of extreme hardship that we see some of the most important leaps in human evolution. Under the intense pressure of the bottleneck, our ancestors had to innovate or die. This is likely when we truly mastered fire. Fire was the ultimate survival tool. It provided warmth during the freezing glacial nights. It warded off predators that were much faster and stronger than us. Most importantly, it allowed us to cook. Cooking food breaks down tough fibers and neutralizes toxins, making more energy available to our bodies. And that energy went straight to our brains. Some researchers believe that the intense social pressure of the bottleneck accelerated the development of the human brain. When resources are scarce, you have to be smarter to find them. You have to communicate better. You have to work together. This was the era where primitive tools became more refined. This was likely the birth of complex social bonds and perhaps even the earliest forms of language. We weren't just surviving as individuals, we were surviving as a collective. We were learning that our greatest strength was not our muscles, but our ability to rely on each other. The bottleneck was an incubator. It forced a small group of ancestors to adopt the traits that would eventually allow us to conquer the globe. It was a period of forced evolution. By the time the population finally began to rebound around 800,000 years ago, these survivors were different. They were tougher. They were smarter. They were the blueprint for everything that followed. Think about the resilience required to keep a species alive when there are only 1,000 of you left on Earth. Every pregnancy was a high-stakes gamble for the future of humanity. Every child who reached adulthood was a triumph. They lived through 100 millennia of uncertainty, never knowing that they were the sole keepers of the human flame. Eventually, the climate began to stabilize. The long, dark age of the bottleneck ended, and the population started to grow again. But the mark of that struggle is still there, tucked away in your cells. It is why humans are so genetically similar to one another. Whether you are from Tokyo, Nairobi, London, or New York, you are more closely related to any other human than two chimpanzees from the same forest are to each other. We are all the children of those 1,280 survivors. We are a species of survivors who walked through the fire and came out the other side. Today, we face our own global challenges. We look at the world and see division and struggle. But the story of the bottleneck reminds us of a fundamental truth. We have been at the edge before. We have seen the end of the world, and we didn't blink. We are the descendants of the ones who refused to give up. We are the ones who held on in the dark when the odds were 1,000,000 to 1. The next time you feel small or insignificant, remember the 1,280. They didn't have technology. They didn't have medicine. They didn't have a plan. All they had was each other and the will to see another sunrise. Because of them, we are here. Because of them, the story continues. Our resilience is not just a trait, it is our heritage. We are the survivors of the ultimate test. And as long as we remember that strength, as long as we continue to innovate and cooperate just like they did, there is no limit to how far we can go. We are the legacy of a miracle.